Hello and welcome to the Creative Network. We're a couple of minutes late, I'm afraid. Um, that's because we're doing things slightly differently this month. We're live from a secret location. Normally we'd be going out from the engine room, which is home to Somerset Film, but we're going out from somewhere else. So apologies for the 2 minute delay. So for those of you that haven't seen a creative network before, my name's Richard, and the creative network comes to you from the Ignite Somerset project. And Ignite Somerset is a project that's managed by Somerset Film and funded by Arts Council England. And what's great about being me and doing the creative network is that I get to meet an artist every month and we have a chat about their practice and usually, as I say, from the engine room. But we're doing it slightly differently this time. We're from a barn somewhere in Somerset. Those of you that have seen the publicity will have noticed that we were going to go live from a field somewhere in Somerset, but we were a little bit concerned about the weather when we were setting up, so we thought we'd make it a bit life easier for ourselves, and we found a barn that's full of artwork. It's amazing. So this month we are chatting to Carolina, who's actually our Ignite Somerset Artist in Residence. And the reason that we're here at this barn is because just beyond this barn, a 2 minute walk, there's a field of flax. And this field of flax is fundamental to Carolina's work. Anyway, I could talk phrases, but we need to actually meet our artist in residence. So I'm going to say hello. Hello.
Hello, Richard.
Thanks for joining us at the network here. Just beyond our lights and cameras here, we've got some artists who are watching us. And so we've got an actual physical audience and we've got an audience online as well. So, first of all, it'd be great to know a little bit more about you and just give us an introduction to your art practice.
Yes, of course. So I'm an interdisciplinary artist. I'm working with performance, first and foremost, textiles, sculpture, installation, and sound. So depending on the subject and theme I would work with, I kind of choose the appropriate medium. My current art practice explores themes around various botanical studies, the symbolism and philosophy of certain plants, and ancient farming methods. And I only recently graduated from my BA in Contemporary Arts Practice at Bath Spa University, and got selected as one of the graduate fellows at Spike Island Gallery in Bristol.
Fantastic.
Yes, so this is my current situation. So I'm based between Bristol and here, where I'm cultivating the field of flax, and have met a wonderful community who supports me endlessly, and to which I owe loads of gratitude. So thank you.
You're looking at the artists assembled here.
Yes.
I know that this group of artists go by the name of Hatch. Just tell us a little bit more about Hatch, if that's okay.
Yes, so I hope I'm not saying anything wrong. But the project started last year during the pandemic. As a kind of drive-through exhibition, so when we had to socially distance, we see this barn, and unfortunately the audience might not see it, but it's a 100-meter long barn, and the whole situation is to support local artists, and with the exhibition, cars were driving through the barn and could see the works. And it was a fantastic opportunity to see works and to experience art, even during lockdown and even during, when restrictions were still up. So I got involved. I think I came to the barn the first time in November last year. I kind of assisted with some filming works. And I then got to joined the second hatch, which took part in May this year. And I developed a piece called Cubiculum Obscurum, which was basically a camera obscura set up at the barn. And the piece was originally shown at an exhibition in Bristol at the Centre of Gravity, Soapworks. And it comprised a performative weaving, so the whole piece was between 30 and 40 minutes and was a live weaving piece. And with the help of a good friend, I constructed a camera obscura using an old telescope lens, which was also found here at the barn. And people who don't know the barn, you have to know it's like a huge museum. Like there are all sorts of tools and things here, and you could just explore it for ages, and you find something new every single day. And just like an old telescope lens, which you can use for a piece of work. Yeah, so this was my beginning, more or less, and now I got offered the opportunity to cultivate a patch of land, which is 30 square meters, I think, to grow some flax and kind of realize my ideas. And yeah, like I said, hugely grateful for this opportunity, and which just allows me to be here more often and kind of work between Bristol and here and kind of take my research into action. I'm reading a lot about plant studies and all the scientific terms and phrases, but to actually get your hands into the soil and just apply what you've learned is just incredible.
Amazing. Just going back to the camera obscura, right? You've given me a video, and I wasn't showing it when you were chatting about it. Do you mind if I just show it?
Of course,
to
of
people
course.
now? You people here actually in the barn, obviously, aren't going to see this, but you can watch it again later on YouTube. We've got.
So this was basically piece was entirely blackened out with black fabric, and behind the black fabric was the camera obscura, and I sat behind it with a weaving frame, and the weaving took, as I said, between 30 and 40 minutes, and the weave gradually evolved. So it's this repetitive movements of my hand, where the weave and the structure gets denser and denser, and throughout the process it kind of goes through various stages, but in the end it ends up with this spiral shape, which obviously refers to loads in my research.
I watched this and I didn't appreciate the repetitive movement and how that was significant. I thought it was creative movement in inverted commas, but which it is, but of course it's representative of the process.
Yeah, and kind of there is something about duration in my work, as we will probably talk later about it, but time and duration and kind of repetitive movement, and
Fantastic. Okay, so can you tell me a little bit more about your background working in textiles?
Oh yeah, so yeah, it might be worth mentioning here that I've got a background in textiles. So I'm a trained made-to-measure tailor, so this was like my first degree before moving to the UK in 2017.
Okay. So before you go on, so that world of being a trained tailor, I don't know anything about that world. An incredible amount of discipline required.
Yes.
Is that a similar discipline when you're operating as an artist?
Well, I would say that the former training, it was a very traditional Viennese school for tailoring. So we would have classes like pattern making, textile chemistry, or sitting in front of the sewing machine for 8 hours a day, basically, and being trained in textile techniques like embroidery, weaving, stitching, as well as working with thermoplastic materials. This whole range of working with textiles very much informed me and trained me in being extremely patient, especially when it comes to my work. And yeah, I guess it just forms the base of my working. It's not just material understanding, but just in terms of showing patience and kind of having a very thorough way of working is probably what informs my work the most, and probably the way I walk through life in general, if people know me.
Okay, that's probably a good lesson for us all.
Yeah. And for instance, in textile chemistry, we burned fibres, and through the smell and through the color of the ash and the remaining ash, we had to identify what sort of fiber it would be, whether it's an animal fiber or a plant fiber or an artificial fiber. But just this, this almost scientific exploration of textiles kind of informs this current project as well, because instead of buying a ready-made material in the shop, I just wish to understand the process, like where does the material come from, what does it require, what kind of, what sort of nutrients do the soil need to have in order to offer a healthy plant growth. What can I do, in terms of with my bare hands and my presence. Not just about the weeding and watering, and but it's something about creating a routine. I need to be here very often to water my plants, to look after them. It has something to do about caring and taking responsibility, and simply understanding the process, quite literally from soil to weave, through physical action, basically. So learning by doing, I guess.
That's fascinating. Across the whole, so that depth of understanding of what's going on, literally the depth of understanding of what's going on beneath the soil and above the soil, and then in the way that you interpret that for your audience, it's that same deep level of understanding all the way through the process, the workflow.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. Okay. When we were chatting about this, and we were coming up with some copy, weren't we, to promote this event? And you talked about the symbolism and philosophy of plants, which sounds really intriguing. So tell us more.
So I guess this is all about my interest in what plants or what specific narratives plants can tell. What does a plant tell about our culture? How do plants shape, influence, and kind of control our society? How do they contribute to the development of a culture? And flax is such an interesting plant. So flax, the word flax comes from the Teutonic words referring to plaiting, which obviously refers to the process how flax is produced into linen fibers. Whereas the Latin word for flax is linum usitatissimum, and linum comes from the Greek word linon, which is kind of a root word, so kind of the base for many other words, whereas usitatissimum means most useful. So this refers to linen being an extremely useful plant. And I guess nowadays Canada and Russia are the most important growers now to grow and process flax. But just going back to the beginning of the 17th century, like 1 out of 6 agricultural laborers would be involved in the whole European countries would be involved in processing flax and working with flax. So it was a quite important agricultural element. And only in the 20th century, like from the 1920s onwards, when artificial fibers were introduced and quickly took over, it kind of got lost and became almost a forgotten craft, because it is a long process to get from flax to linen, and not many people have this knowledge nowadays, unfortunately.
There's a few photographs. I've not been showing any photographs, and it'd be quite good, I think, to just drop a few things in.
Yes. I might just tell a story. Just recently I read about, since we are in Somerset, just recently I read about a story about a young woman, and she wrote that during the First World War, young women would often give up a few weeks of the summer holidays in order to pull flax.
Right.
So, you know, kind of working on the field. And the flax would then be further processed and kind of used for the wings of the airplanes. So when wings were still wooden structures, the kind of linen was used to kind of, or was stretched or formed the wings.
Yes.
But so during the First World War, when Belgium was kind of occupied and linen supplies were short, England kind of imported some linen experts who would, you know, train specific farmers who were living in a suitable area about the processing and the growing flax, because it was something so specific. Yeah, so just saying this must be somewhere here in this area, but it didn't quite say where.
Okay. So, I mean, this might seem like a silly question, but I don't know anything about the production of linen. how do you create linen from flax?
Okay, so this might be the right point to, or the right time to explain the difference between flax and linen.
Okay.
So flax refers to the plant and the unprocessed fiber, whereas linen refers to the processed fiber and the woven fabric. And flax is a so-called bast fiber, which means that the fibers kind of lie, you know, under the stem of the plant. So it's like fiber bundles. And there are two varieties of flax. There is the flax that is used for the fibers, which is often referred to as fiber flax. And then there is the flax that is used for seed oil. So this is the linseed flax or even seed flax. And they are very different in terms of growing them and processing them. Mm-hmm. So the fiber flax, let's focus on the fiber flax, mm-hmm. because that's why we are here for. The fiber flax is, it grows up to between 80 and 120 centimeters, obviously depending on the circumstances. And the fiber flax would have to be harvested before, like about 30 days after flowering. So I'm sure you've seen the beautiful blue flowers of the flax plant. So the flowering would only take about a week up to 10 days. And then the plants would be harvested by pulling the plants, because you would want to preserve as much fiber as you can. So you would keep the roots. Okay, I'm getting a bit confused now. So the flowering is like a week to 10 days, and then you give it another 30 days, and then the plant would be more or less ready to be harvested. Then you would pull it with the root, and then the root would, the plants would need to dry. So this is where the term flax hay comes in. So you would dry the flax either indoors or outdoors, depending on the weather and season, obviously. And then begins a process called retting. And there are two different types of retting. So there is dew retting and water retting. And it's basically a chemical process where the fibers are kind of separated from the plant stem. And it's a very smelly task to do. So, and it's a long process as well until, the kind of chemical compounds break down. And then you would remove the seed capsules from the plants. Mm-hmm. Then you would break them. You have specific tools. Nowadays, machines do the job, but I'm hoping to get original tools to go through the process. So to kind of break the fibers from the stems. And then you would comb them with a comb-like tool and kind of sort them in length. And then you would go through the spinning and weaving. So, you see, it's a really, really long process.
It's time, isn't it? Time is a major factor.
Yeah.
In this. Just to say, for people here that are joining us in the barn, and for those people that are watching on YouTube, if you think of any insightful questions that you'd like to ask, then we'll leave time at the end for some questions and answers. And if you've got a question back at home, then just drop it in the comments, and I'll ask Carolina on your behalf. There's a couple of videos here of you actually working in the flax field. They're connected to, I think, a question around time. You know, the growing process, you've sort of talked a little bit about that, the analysing of the soil, the scientific deep level understanding that goes on. Just talk a little bit more about that. And you've mentioned patience. It seems to me as one of the major ingredients is time.
Yeah.
Some artists work really quickly and they're able to, because of the materials that they're using. But you know, you're in a way, you know, it's beyond your control, isn't it? Tell us a little bit about how that makes you feel and what time means to your process.
Yeah. So I have to say I'm a person who has its routines. You know, I have my morning rituals, I have my evening rituals, and through those rituals, the day is kind of messed up a bit. So, you know, I need time to process my thoughts, I need time to reflect and develop my ideas. So I also wish to give my work time to develop and quite literally grow into something bigger. So most of the time I'm working on various projects, and they would inform each other, so kind of feed into each other. Another project I'm currently working on is a collaborative project with artist Sarah Rees, and we are working in partnership with the National Botanic Garden in Wales. So this is a project which goes over a period of a year. So, you know, this will also, it will be mainly research, and we try to, you know, work with all sorts of media and are influenced by ecologies and the cultural exchange between the two nations, Austria and Wales. But again, you know, it's a longer project which also needs time to develop. And with the flax project, like I said, it's a long process from the seed to the finished thread. And I have to confess, I started quite late in preparing the ground, and thankfully I had helping hands for that, because it was incredible hard labor, like literally preparing a ground that was not meant for cultivation, you know, pulling out all those roots. It was mainly bamboo, nettu, moss, but just to say, every single plant I, you know, excavated and put out of the soil, I will use in my work. So for instance, I currently got all the bamboo roots in my studio at Spike Island and developing some dyes from it. So I will use this to kind of work, you know, to dye my fabrics and to dye my threads to work with. Same as with the moss, you know, there are so many techniques. You can use moss as a kind of, you can dye your materials with. So I've only, as I said, I've only quite late prepared the ground, and I'm actually quite glad that I can sit straight again, because it was such hard labor, especially if you're not used to such hard labor. But you know, it is so wonderful in a way, because I guess exhaustion plays an essential part in my work, and also in previous pieces, the kind of physical exhaustion and going beyond my limits often.
No, that's interesting. Is it like the runner who you know, 3/4 of the way through the marathon gets to that transcendental point?
Yeah.
is it that?
More or less, yeah. But yeah, often I just feel my work deserves this devotion and this kind of passion, and my work just means everything to me. So this is just a natural reaction, I think. Although I need to make sure to keep a healthy balance, sometimes at least.
So are you aiming to raise a particular awareness of a particular theme in your work?
Well, you know, that's somehow a tricky question, but I think I can just say, you know, how much this project means to me, you know, from a mental and physical perspective. Like, in order to cultivate this field, I need to take on responsibility. You know, it is responsibility to look after land. You need to be there regularly, you need to water it, you need to weed it, you need to look after your plants, you need to develop some certain routine. And this routine has something grounding, you know, it grounds you, and it kind of slows down your perception. You just realize things you probably wouldn't realize if you just rush through your life. You know, just inspecting how the plants grow and kind of measuring how many centimeters they've grown from one week to another. And every now and then I'm pulling out a plant from, unfortunately you can't see the field right now, but it's like 4 different patches where I apply different organic fertilizers, just to see how they would grow differently. And when I pull out the individual plants, I would just inspect the root growth, you know, how do they form, how do they develop. It's just something so meditative. And like I said, it's something about caring and looking after, and yeah, it's learning by doing. And I was just thinking about a book published by Tim Ingold. It's called Making, and he speaks about making as a way to gain knowledge. You know, you kind of make to gain knowledge. You make to change lives. You make to create an environment. Yeah. So yeah, I think, you know, I'm not an expert in working with plants. I'm not a botanist, I'm not a scientist, but what I've learned throughout this process already is simply mind-blowing. Like, I've started to analyze the soil. I now understand, okay, why does this plant collapse now? You know, it might just be too much nitrogen, or, you know, another nutrient in the soil that isn't quite right. But yeah, it's simply a wonderful process.
Just a couple more questions. How do you define your relationship with your audience, and is there a way in which people can get involved in your process?
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, if anyone should watch or listen to this talk now and wants to get in touch, please do, because I'm convinced that the most wonderful way to gain new knowledge is just by talking to each other, sharing knowledge, sharing experiences. And like I said, I'm not an expert, but I'm more than happy and willing to share what I've learned so far, and to, you know, I could do with a set of helping hands when it comes to the next weeding and especially the harvest. So yes, please do get in touch. And there are quite a few interesting projects going on at the moment, like community gardens, actually growing flax, you know, just to raise awareness of where this material comes from, and to kind of reintroducing it in the UK and beyond. So yeah, to kind of revive an almost forgotten craft, skill, knowledge, wisdom.
Okay. So I just wanted to ask you a little bit about the project that you're currently doing with us at Somerset Film. So this is our 3rd year now where we've hosted an artist. That's the right word. Hosted. And
welcomed.
Welcomed. That's better. And it's a process that happens over a number of weeks, and it runs up to Somerset Art Week's Open Studios. That's a festival of visual arts that will happen across the county. And we're at the very beginning of that journey, aren't we?
Yes.
We've just popped over to the engine room, which is home to Somerset Film.
Hired some equipment.
Had a look at some equipment, microphones, lights, cameras and things. And it obviously we're at an early stage, and you're probably, you know, the creative process has to evolve, and I appreciate that. What are your feelings for this? You know, we've got a couple of months to go here. for you to create a piece of work, part of which we'll showcase at the engine room, part of which might be somewhere else or might be live streamed in. I know it's an early stage, but just share a little bit about what your hopes and ideas are.
Yes. So, the original idea with this project was to create a series of works and working with materials that are available on site, like literally working with everything that grows there. Like I said, I've been working with the mosses, I've been working with the bramble roots, with the nettle roots, and I will. Also I excavated some clay before preparing the ground and sowing the seeds. So I'm currently making some sculptural objects from the clay.
Right.
And I'm aiming to do a series of performances. All kind of connected to the growing process, to the kind of maintenance of the field, and also thinking, I don't want to say too much, but I wish to also focus on improving my sound skills. Gaining more experience in recording sounds, editing sounds, and I'm hoping to develop a sound piece which will then be exhibited at the engine room. And just thinking back, I sowed the seeds on 2 different dates. The first one was the 13th of June, so as you see, quite late.
Yeah.
The second one was on the 16th of June, so you usually give like 2 months for the plants to flower, so
yeah.
This should be very soon. And then 1 month later, which could actually is, I think, perfect timing for Somerset Art Weeks when it comes to the harvest. So it would be great to kind of connect it with people coming here. Maybe they are even invited to help me with the harvesting process, or maybe we have a little feast. Let's see what what will be allowed. But yeah. So and just recently I exhibited a piece at a group exhibition in London, and the piece was also developed here at the barn. So great things happening here. And the piece was a series of 13 knots, and all knots are used in farming and agriculture. And I filmed my hands, and my body kind of disappeared into darkness, and you could literally just see my hands tying and untying the knots. And this I consider also being part of this whole From Soil to Weave project. So it kind of incorporates all these kind of different media. So yeah, let's see where this takes us. But I'm looking forward to learn more about sound editing and sound recording. And
fantastic. Well, we're really pleased to have you as our artist in residence. So don't know if anybody in the assembled barn here has any questions that they'd like to ask. I'll give you a minute or two to think about that if you want to. But just to say that for more information on what we're doing at Somerset Film and at the Engine Room, just visit somersetfilm.com. And there's a big, I think, orange button on the top right-hand side there that says Get Involved. So you can see how you can get involved in various events that we're involved in. I think we've got the Junction film showing event, which is kind of filmmakers, but that's filmmakers, anybody from people who consider themselves really serious filmmakers to somebody who's just shot something they're really proud of on their phone. And that's tomorrow. So go to the Get Involved page and you can see about that. There's lots of other information on there that you can see, that's projects that we're involved in. And you might also want to connect to the Ignite Somerset website, which is actually more of a virtual gallery. And there's some examples of past projects in a kind of virtual space that you can take a look at. So that's ignitesomerset.com. You can link to it directly from Somerset Film. Has anybody got any questions they'd like to ask? looking beyond the lights at the masses of people.
I've got one.
Oh, we've got a question.
Yeah. When did you have your light bulb moment about the flax field? Was it before you came here, or did coming to this amazing place sort of get the inspiration going?
I'm just gonna repeat that, if that's okay. Just because we've got the mics on. Yeah. So, good question. The light bulb moment for the flax field, was that before you started kind of collaborating and meeting up and being inspired by the artists here at Hatch? Is that fair enough?
So I guess I've always wanted to, like I said, coming from a textile background, I always wanted to grow my own materials, just because I'm interested to use seasonal materials rather than ready-mades. But I guess, in recent years, it was just a lack of space that I haven't had. When coming here, walking through the woods, seeing this paradise and this wilderness where one can basically realize one's ideas and dreams. I think it started when coming here and seeing what is possible, and my aim to grow my own materials. And just to say, I partly grew up on a farm, so I've always had a connection to growing, and my dad would grow all our vegetables and fruits and try out specific varieties, and doing some all sorts of experiments when it comes to growing. And so I've always had this connection to agriculture and farming, and during my time in Vienna, I've also been working with a weaver, and she connected me with a person who would use all of her plants growing in their garden to dye her fabrics and to dye her threads. And I've been working with her as well to just gain some insight, and it just opened up my my horizon to see what is possible with what you could literally grow in your garden. And I guess, like I said, flax is such an interesting plant, such an ancient plant. If you think back to the ancient Egypt, where there were fabrics like woven linen fabrics, which are so fine, and that you can rarely compare them to nowadays fabrics. It was like, I think per centimeter it was like 60 to 100 single threads, so like extremely dense and extremely high quality fabrics. So something about this ancient element and this kind of so let's see how it goes. The flax looks good at the moment. Unfortunately, I can't show you and show the audience, but it looks good. And as I said, flowering should be in like 2 weeks' time. And
it's your initial response was space. That's the thing that's important. And
yes, I guess one of the most important things for artists, space and time.
Yes,
often struggling with time. Yes.
Or in flax field.
Yeah.
And actually, your the connection that you've made here with some of the artists that join us now, that's been really key, hasn't it?
Yes,
I think
absolutely.
For that creative support, I'm sure, but also the practical support of here's a space you could grow some flax here.
And I mean, this is so rare, finding a place where you can just say, "Can I do this?" Yes, of course. I mean, so truly blessed.
Any other questions? Okay. Well, look, we'll wrap it there, I think. Thank you so much for joining us for this month's Creative Network. Our Creative Network next month will also be with Carolina, and we'll just see what progress you're making on the Artist in Residency project. And the final one will be in September, which is also the same month as Somerset Art Week's Open Studios. So thank you for joining us, and perhaps the people in the barn here could give Carolina a clap, and you at home can also clap too. everybody. You're getting some thumbs up on YouTube and some actual thumbs up.
Thank you, everyone, for watching.
Thanks for joining us, and see you in a month's time. Thank you very much. Thanks, Carolina.
Thanks, Richard.